In each episode of the 411, I'll be catching up with a business leader who, to put it bluntly, has created a shit hot place to work. We're going to be digging deep to understand what that means and how they've managed to achieve that. So if you're a business owner either going through growing pains at the moment or wanting to stand out in a crowded marketplace, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the first ever episode of the 411. This morning I'm joined by Chris Reid, who is the CEO of Connect Childcare. So thanks very much for your time.
No problem, nice to see you.
So there's a reason why we've chosen you as our first guest, Chris. In one of our chats, we talked about you wanting to create a shit hot place to work. Now, this podcast was nearly called the Shit Hot Business Podcast. We didn't know we could get away with that. However, because you articulated it so well in terms of what you're trying to do with Connect Childcare, it made sense that you were our first guest. So we're going to kind of move on to that shit hot place to work and what that means to you and how you've created it. But to start with, could you tell us a little bit about your career before Connect Childcare, because it's pretty varied, isn't it? And then how you landed on the concept for Connect Childcare.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much for us being the inaugural Shit Hot podcast. Sounds good. So I've always been reasonably entrepreneurial, not particularly academic, and went to work pretty early. I didn't finish college, went straight into work, but then found myself on an apprenticeship path, moved into sales and marketing, and studied on the job, which really worked for me, being able to apply what I was learning to a practical environment. And then I got banned from driving. I was working in a sales position in a computer company not far from here, and thought that actually what's the point in sticking around. I got as far as I could do in that. Well, probably I could have gone further in the business, but I got to a level where if I sacrificed it, I could always come back to that level. So went travelling around the world. I was away for about 3 and a bit years in total. Did some pretty cool things, met the Dalai Lama, became a dive instructor, set up a business in Australia selling cars to backpackers. Wow. Which was an interesting experience, but all character building stuff. I never went to university. My friends had gone to university, and to some degree I'd always felt a little bit inadequate because I was in telesales all the time. I felt that the travelling was a bit like my university, and went off and did some really interesting things. Came back with literally no money whatsoever. My dad's friend had set up a software business in Blackburn, developing software for domiciliary care companies. He literally just developed it and needed somebody to take it to market for him. So I joined as business development manager, worked on the branding, pretty much every aspect, cold calling, prospecting, which had been my background previously, and then took it to market, and we were really successful. He was supportive of my further education, and I got a postgrad diploma in the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So I was starting to think a lot more strategically, but he wouldn't listen. Okay. And that was a source of frustration for me, because I was coming up with ideas that would literally fall in on deaf ears. So I had a chance meeting with an old school friend. He developed a piece of software that was effectively a database of service users, booking patterns of attendance, staff rotas, billing, that kind of thing. And it could have been taken into a number of different vertical markets. So originally, because I come from domiciliary care, I looked at that, but knew it was competitive and knew that the addressable market was pretty small. We looked at dentistry, we looked at a load of different industries, but at the time my sister was a nursery manager, my mum's best friend had 5 out of school clubs, my accountant at the time had 3 nurseries, and the government, so this is in 2004, and the government was putting a load of money into early years education. It was starting to become widely recognised that investing in children's early years, particularly before they turn 2, about 90% of a child's brain forms certainly before the 5. Okay. So we just we decided that was the route we were going to take. A lot of government investment going in made it attractive, and we literally launched with the bare bones of a product. We were going to exhibitions, and people would come to us and say, well, it doesn't do this, and we'd say, well, if we build it for you,
I can make it do that.
Will you buy it?
Yeah.
And really sort of iterated it, and then grew sort of very organically, and sort of bootstrapped the business up to about 2012, and that I know this leads into further questions. That was a big step change for us because I then had children in nursery as well.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that, and then as a user of that software, I guess it took on a bit of a different angle, didn't it?
Yeah, well, unfortunately for me, I never got to use it because my children had left by the time I actually developed the solution.
Okay.
But I saw it from our customer's point of view, which was an insight that I hadn't previously got.
I'm with you. So I guess background-wise, sales is quite strong, isn't it, throughout your career? Having the opportunity to work for businesses and having quite a broad role where you launch that product. So I can see totally, and then your network within the nursery sector. So I can see how you kind of landed on the concept. I guess for anyone to set up a business, it's a risk, isn't it? It's a real risk, and you've got to have something in you that is pushing you to do that, as opposed to arguably sometimes maybe be a bit more comfortable and work for someone else. So what are those kind of motivators for you? What made you think, no, it's worth taking the risk?
I've always been a bit of a risk taker.
Yeah.
I've always had quite a strong belief in my capabilities, and I think often being employed sort of stifles that, or certainly did for me. I think the number one driver is my family, and the security for my family, and being in a position where I can provide for them the opportunities that I was given. So I was given amazing opportunities. I didn't necessarily take advantage of them, but going to college or university, but I was always supported to make the right decisions for me and be happy. And that lasted with me. So that's the primary motivator from my point of view. I think the other thing as well is that there were some personal circumstances as I was growing up that were quite difficult, and I think that really just pushed me to be uber positive. So not get dragged back into, and I think that's one of the things that you need as a leader, particularly if you're running your own business, is that things will happen. There will be situations that are somewhat out of your control, or you'll drop the ball, but you can't worry about what's gone behind you. You can only change what's in front of you, for want of a better cliche.
Do you think that inadequacy that you talked about a little bit when you were younger, because you maybe didn't go down the mainstream route of uni and stuff, do you think that's given you a bit of a, I'm going to show people what I can do, or not?
I sort of genuinely fell in people's shadows. I was in telesales. It's not unattractive. It's I was making 200 phone calls a day trying to sell loans to people at tea time. It's not particularly. It's an amazing. Now I look back, it's an amazing skill, because what you learn is, particularly in telesales, that you've lost 80% of all communication, so you've got to work so much harder to get your message.
But there's a snobbery sometimes around sales, isn't there?
And I'd gone to a private school in Blackburn. From an education point of view, it was all about Oxbridge. It was all about you're going to go to, and to the point that you wouldn't necessarily know what an ONC was or a BTEC.
Really, right, okay.
And that was the route I ended up in, and so it was a. So I do think that drove me, but I've always had that. I've always had that in me anyway. I set up a car cleaning round when I was 13 that I ran until I was 17. So I could earn money to go and do whatever it was
so
that I did at that age.
You kind of had that entrepreneurial, I'll just make sure something happens and that graft is there to get the results.
And a belief. And I think a self-belief, and that was important.
And I guess to pick up on that inadequacy, because I think if you lined up 100 CEOs, MDs, entrepreneurs, 99 of them will have a bit of backstory, and I can definitely resonate. I was probably the underdog. Academically slightly, but certainly like family background and stuff at school, so I kind of know that feeling of going against the grain a bit and then coming out and actually, as you have done, creating a really successful business. So I was keen to understand that. Okay, so let's move on to a shit hot place to work. What does it mean? And I guess how have you created it? But before you go into that, I know that you've been awarded the 65th Best Company nationally and the 34th Best Tech Company nationally. So you're clearly well on your way to creating this amazing place to work. So talk me through what that means to you and how you've done that.
Well, I think it's a continuing journey.
Okay.
I like to think we've created something special. But it's that's not where it stops. I don't think you can be complacent. Things change all the time. Circumstances change. COVID's changed things immeasurably. But I think if I was gonna, what does shit hot mean to me? It's a motivated team that's aligned to a strong vision and a strong purpose. That know what what's expected of them, and they have a say in how we're going to get there. So I think it all boils down to alignment and belief, but actually clarity of direction. And I think my role as a leader is to say, look, this is the North Star. This is the direction. This is what we've got to do. We have to get here. This is the expectation. But I'm not going to tell you how to get there. It's for you guys to say, look, if we're going to try and achieve this, I need to then work on X, Y, and Z, and I need to do 10 of these, 4 of those, and 1 of that. And I think to make sure that the team's empowered to make those decisions with guidance, and as the autonomy and the ability to make mistakes. I think COVID really brought that to the surface, because at the end of the day, everybody was in a world that they didn't really fully understand, and everybody had to be able to make a decision. We shrank temporarily the business from something like 60 odd staff down to about 15, and it very quickly became not
shrank as in furloughed.
Yeah. And then everybody came back by the August. So as a temporary thing, but everybody had to hunker down. But everybody needed to be able to. We didn't necessarily have the luxury of being able to validate everything. It was okay. You're empowered to make that decision. Don't worry, you can make a mistake. Maybe not make it twice or 3 times. But and I think that to me is about the belief in your team that you're going to be able to deliver, but the ability for them to not only have a say in how they're going to get there, but not be fearful of dropping the ball, because then I think that stifles too much. And I think genuinely that then helps to foster a connection to the values of the business, which is massively important. Everybody should see themselves in the values. I firmly believe that that's a collective thing. It shouldn't be, here's your values. It should be what means something to you. And that's it, and everybody has a laugh, and everybody gets on, and we're here to have some fun, but actually there's a job to be done, and you've got a level of control in how you do that.
And I think that vision and value side of things, certainly when I set for 14, 15 years ago, it was probably more about words on walls, and you kind of had to have it because that's just what businesses had. Whereas now, I feel when I'm going out to meet with clients and businesses, actually there's real meaning behind that. And if you look at any of the surveys that have been done recently, why people leave a job, it's largely because they don't feel that sense of belonging, they don't buy into that bigger vision.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we talk to our clients about all the time is, and some absolutely have that ingrained in the business, and others really don't and are quite far away from that. So that whole vision and value side of things, I think it's so topical at the moment. Where did you start? Did you have that from day one? Is it something that's come in and was it a collaborative exercise? How did it come about?
I don't think the vision was. I think the vision was probably mine to start with.
And what is that vision then?
It's to improve outcomes for children globally.
Okay.
So it's there's a strong purpose. It's hard. And I think we're fortunate. Not necessarily fortunate, but to some degree we are, because everybody gets what we do. We're not a really abstract concept. We're here to provide the tools that allow practitioners to spend more time with the children in the care and bring parents closer to the development of their own children. So even if you don't have your own children, you know somebody that does. It's undeniable that if you can help a child develop, particularly if they're from a disadvantaged area, in their formative years, and allow then when 90% of the brain's forming, then it's hard. We're doing it for the kids. It's not a hard thing to grasp.
Such a strong purpose.
And I think that's helped us, and that helps to recruit. And I think the strength of vision really, really helps us to get some talented people onto the team. But then the values, they can't be prescriptive in my view. So the way that we ran that process, or whether I ran the process, was I surveyed the whole of the team at the time and asked them to suggest to me what the three strongest values they had that they ran their lives with.
Brilliant.
And we collated all that information together, and I think we had about 64 staff, something like that. So I broke it up into 8 teams of 8 cross-departmental teams. I called it the Culture Club.
Brilliant.
And I had Karma Chameleon playing in the background, and I had Boy George on the wall, and that was a a big realisation then of a generational gap, because everybody came in and said, who's that
Who's
guy?
that?
What's this music? But then what we did was we sort of broke down, what's good about us, what's not good about us, what's important to us, loads of post-it notes, boiled all that down. So I did that over the course of a week or maybe slightly more, and then asked each of the teams that we pulled together to nominate one person from that team to be a cultural ambassador.
Okay.
And then we formed another team, and so that was effectively then somebody from every department coming together to then really boil down not just the values of the business, but also the expected behaviours. So what does it actually mean to work at Connect? What is it that we believe in? I think sometimes they can become a little bit static, and they can be seen as being words on the wall. We've definitely got them on the wall as you walk in there.
Yeah.
But I think
have to.
but what you've got to make sure of is that you embed them in everything that you do, and that's not easy. And that's perhaps not something that we properly squared off yet.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that is important, because you need a way of being able to say you've demonstrated the behaviours you were expecting, or actually you don't really fit the values that we're after as a business, and this probably isn't the right business for you.
Yeah, the right place.
And I think sometimes you've got to use it from a reward and an acknowledgement point of view, but also actually it supports some tough decisions sometimes.
Yeah, no, definitely. And roughly how long ago was it that you did that exercise that you're referring to?
4 years, 3 years,
okay.
something like that.
And this might sound like a silly question, but you're not born knowing that how to set a business up or how to create a culture club. So that's not something you're born knowing, is it? So how did you come up with that? Was it through your own personal development, seeing other people do it, having career coaches, or?
Never really had a coach. I've had mentors.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to have to work with some exceptionally gifted people that I've learned a lot from. I read a lot.
Yeah.
I absorb myself in things. I daydream a lot.
Yeah.
In the early days, and that's one thing I probably miss quite a lot now, is I used to probably travel about 1,000 miles a week in the car, and whilst that's mind-numbingly boring, it does give you a lot of time to think about strategy and daydream. And I think everybody needs the opportunity to look out of a window sometimes and just chill and let your mind distill stuff. I think that's where it's sort of come from. And actually some of it just seems to make sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you know what? I think that thinking time's massive, actually.
Oh, it really is.
Because if you're not careful, and I know I've massively been a victim of this, you just constant, go to grow a business. And it's probably only been in the last 3 years or so that I've given myself that thinking time, and that was a bit scary for someone that's like constantly doing stuff. It's a bit scary to give yourself that time, because you're like, what am I going to do now? But actually, that's when some of those best ideas come.
Oh, absolutely. Best ideas I've ever had were in a car.
Yeah.
You think, my God, why didn't I think of that before?
Mine tends to be when I'm drying my hair, but it's that time.
Mine doesn't take that
not as much, but it's that time, isn't it? And I think the point you make about the values and where you're at is a really interesting one, because it sounds like you've done loads of amazing exercises, but to embed those, that's not overnight, is it? No. That takes actually a lot of work, and interestingly, it's exactly where we're at with it at the moment. So we've engaged with like a brand agency recently to make sure that through every part of our business they're embedded. So like you said, it's not a right, that's done, move on to the next thing. It's evolving, isn't it? Yeah,
and everything has to continually improve. Yeah. It doesn't matter what part of the business it is, we've always got to look at ways to make ourselves better. Yeah.
Or you're going to stand still, which I don't think is part of your game plan, is it? So
not really.
No. So, moving on to an area that really interests me, given part of what we do, is your HR team. Yeah. So, you employ roughly 80 people.
69.
69, sorry. Yeah. And you've got HR manager and HR director.
Chief People Officer.
Chief People Officer, which is even better, because that's just a much modern, better way of reflecting what that role does. Now, lots of people would look at the size of your business and go, that's too much HR support. For us, we find that really refreshing, because it shows that a business gets how important their people are. Yeah. So could you talk me through kind of the mindset behind investing that heavily in your HR and what that's meant for Connect Childcare from an outcome perspective?
Yeah, I think we try to reposition the team. I think HR tends to be viewed as being operational. It's how do I log sickness?
Yeah.
Can I have some holidays, please? Health and safety and what have you. So we sort of reposition that as people and culture. And you're probably right. We don't necessarily need. But that's not the wrong way of putting it. People may look at us and think that you don't necessarily need a chief people officer that's looking at people's strategy. But we're not going to be 69 staff for long.
Yeah.
We've got plans and support to scale. So for me, it's about getting the bedrock in place.
Yeah.
And I think no matter how lofty my vision is or how ambitious the plans might be that investors have backed or whatever, the people that are going to deliver it are the team. Now, one of the challenges that we face, and perhaps increasingly since COVID, is we're in Nelson.
Yeah.
Nelson's nice. It's not particularly a tech hotbed.
Yeah.
We're on the doorstep of Manchester. Manchester's got a phenomenal amount of venture capital flowing through it right now. So all of our staff are in demand. Roles that we would have typically recruited, junior developers at 35k potentially, we've had to rethink that. It'll be offered significantly more elsewhere. So, for us, but we've got a certain size of pot we can play with, but we've got to attract the best talent.
Yeah.
But it's not even necessarily localized in that way anymore because of COVID. My development team could work in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I know that's potentially a big draw or getting London rates. So we've got to wrap as much as we can around employee engagement and trying to look at career development. I do see yourself sometimes as a bit of a feeder club, but to use a football analogy, we're not top of the Premier League. We're not going to be able to go out and spend 84 million on Ronaldo. So what we've got to do is nurture the talent, knowing that at some point they may go off and do bigger and better things. Maybe not better things, but go off and follow their path elsewhere. But my view has always been if somebody does leave, then if they can turn around and say Connect was a great place to work and they helped me on my journey, then I've done a good job.
Then you've both benefited.
Yeah, and actually reputationally we grow. People, and that helps to recruit. So it becomes like a cycle to some degree. But yeah, and that's fundamentally why I think the importance is around people and culture.
Yeah.
And that's why Sonia's been such a great help, because I can focus with her now on strategy, not operations. I'm not particularly detailed in my outlook. I am sort of bigger picture. So it's really, really good to be able to look at, okay, this is where we want to be in 3 years. What does that mean for the people team? What do we need to do in terms of recruitment and retention? What do we need to do in terms of diversity, inclusion and belonging? What do we need to do about all these different areas that are going to make it a shit-hot place to work?
Yeah, I'm not a football fan, but I get the analogy, and I think there's lots of owner managers that will be listening to this that think, they don't have the deepest pockets in the world, and let's be honest, that's a whole other conversation, because those businesses that are offering crazy salaries now, give it another 18 months, that might come to bite them on the backside in a big way. But even if we weren't potentially facing a recession, the fact is you're not able to do what some of the bigger global businesses are, so therefore you have to invest in your own people, your own culture, and so much of it, yes, it's about attracting them, but this is what we say to our clients all the time: how are you retaining them?
Yeah.
Because if you're retaining them, that's your first battle to recruitment. You're always going to need to recruit for growth, but at least keep hold of the people that you've got in the first place. And I think that's constantly what we tell our clients, but we see quite often businesses probably getting to 100 staff and they don't actually have a proper HR person. They have somebody that does the HR admin, but 100 people is, so much stuff to deal with, isn't it? So it's just really refreshing that you've got that, and I think it's, again, reflective of, the kind of organisation that you are. So the next thing I want to move on to, and it's probably quite a big question. Yeah. So I get that you're probably only going to be able to give us 2 or 3 highlights, but I've listened to loads of podcasts of successful business owners, and they almost skip the part of how they got from how they started to where they are now. And I remember years ago meeting someone who ran a recruitment company, and they were like, so 100 mil turnover. And I'm thinking, how have you done that? And that whole 10, 15, 20 years was skipped, and I'm sat there thinking early days of my business, still not quite sure necessarily how I'm going to grow. So could you maybe talk us through some of the key kind of decisions that you've made that have really escalated your growth, if you like?
Yeah.
Decisions, milestones, whatever it may be.
I think So I think the biggest one was making the choice to do it on my own.
Yeah.
I think that was fundamentally the biggest, because then you've got it in your hands, and it's up to you. You either pull it out of the bag or you don't.
Yeah.
And I think everybody's learning. Not other than some of the smaller businesses I've worked in. I've never worked in a big company. I've never really been able to see what structure necessarily looks like. So we basically grew very, very organically and bootstrapped it. Doing a lot of the, as I said, 1,000 miles a week, driving to meetings, but prospecting in the car on the way down to try and book the meetings as well.
Full on.
Yeah, and you can only do so much of that. But I don't think we'd necessarily realised that in order to be able to break out of me doing everything, not necessarily supporting and developing, but trying to run the business and actually be out on the road again, that it's you need to build a structure around you, and I think if I look forward to about 2010 or 11, we were based in Blackburn, and we nearly went out of business.
Right.
So I had to put my staff on half wages. I've been trying to source funding, not because we were running out of cash, but because I wanted to build it. But a few things happened, and all at the same sort of time, and I had to pay my staff half wages. So I'd say at that time, it was when the Northwest Fund was operational in the northwest of England. Loads of EU money was coming in. And I'd been around all of the funds to try and tap into some of this cash.
Right.
And actually got introduced to a guy called Ashwin Patak, whose family was the Patak's curry paste family. He didn't work in the family business. He set up his own software company. He was really successful. He sold it on to a company called Mysis. He became a divisional MD. He then went on to be an independent director of 3i. So he got loads of experience. And that fund wasn't for us. They couldn't have funded it if I wanted to. But I'd met Ash. And Ash was he couldn't quite work out why, but he liked me, and he knew that there was a business in there, but the office was a dump, and he couldn't understand why we were in the office. But I managed to bring him in. It was literally, I think he'd agreed to join me as a non-exec about a month or 2 months before I had to then go to him and say, look, I don't think I can afford to pay people's wages.
Yeah.
We got people to go on half wages. And then within 6 months from there, we'd then raised about 150 grand with a valuation of £1 million.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily because Ash was there, it's because I then knocked on the back door. But it was the sequence of events. We got really, really quite low, then got that valuation. I then used that money to be able to build out the sales team and become more strategic about order acquisition rather than me. I could only service about 6 demos a week tops. So you're only ever going to get so far if you can only have 6 demos. So we brought in a telesales function. We split the country into northern and southern regions. So I brought in a BDM in each. That then meant that the prospecting was happening all the time. It meant that the diaries were full. When somebody was expecting a call back, they got a call back. Yeah. The pipeline was being nurtured, and the 2 BDMs could then focus on filling their diaries, so they'd have 8 demos a week each. So all of a sudden, we'd gone from me doing 6 to doing 16, and allowing me to focus on the enterprise customers that took a lot more relationship building and a lot longer to land.
But higher value.
Yeah. And then that sort of coincided with me having children.
Okay.
So that's when, sort of coming back to the beginning of the chat, that gave me a different perspective. We'd always provided the back office management systems, tracking inquiries, managing registers, fundamentally creating a bill.
Right.
But what I'd realised was that the process of documenting where my children were up to developmentally and then engaging with me, because I've been on the road so much in that period of time when my children were growing up. I only got to speak to my daughter's key worker once in 4 years.
Right.
When I sat down with a learning journey, I could say, well, actually, this is all great. It's always good to see pasta pictures, and it's always good to see things made out of potato skins. And here's a lot of things that she can do. And I'd look at it and say, well, actually, I know she can do this because she does this at the weekend. And actually, what you're creating, as great as it is, which is like a lever arch file, is actually incomplete, and that's what's following her through to mainstream education. So we, and I then asked the key worker, how long does it take to pull this all together? And it was 8 hours a week. So what this key worker was doing, instead of looking after Sasha, my daughter, she was taking photographs on a digital camera, she was writing on a post-it note, she was then going away, writing it into a folder, printing out photographs, using 10% of the photographs, and the other 90% I'd get in a bin bag once every 12 months. And it's always nice to see your children dressed as a cow.
Yeah.
But it's better to see them dressed as a cow when they're actually dressed as a cow.
Yeah.
So we became the first to market to digitise.
Okay.
So we developed apps for the nursery staff to be able to make observations of the children in their care, and then we developed apps for parents so that they could then engage with that and it create like a timeline, but then actually complete the loop so that the parents could make observations of their own children that they could feed into the nursery, so that the nursery staff had a more holistic view as well. So that whole, sort of 2011, 2012 was where that was our inflection point.
So non-exec funding, and I guess from your perspective, seeing up close the nursery environment and what you as a parent would benefit more from.
Yeah, and the realisation that we could have gone bust.
Yeah, and I don't think we can ignore that point, because I imagine, again, most businesses a few years ago, we had a bit of a perfect storm, which I think is what you were explaining. It wasn't as scary as yours sounded, but that is a bit of a wake-up call that actually something's got to change and you can't be the only one selling, and you needed to create that infrastructure around you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was, I'd say that was the pivotal moment, and from there, over a number of years, we then started to dominate the larger providers. So we've now got, I think, 8 of the top 10 nursery groups in the UK. We've got about 51% of the top 50 with a market leader, which is a great position to be in, but by the same token, it takes a lot of hard work and structure and discipline and alignment to get there.
And you're now private equity backed.
Yeah.
So when did this happen then?
So the first round was through AXM, which was
back in
2012.
Right.
We raised a really at the time it seemed like loads.
Yeah.
It was a really modest amount of seed funding. We then raised again in 2017 through Deepbridge. They provided us with capital to help us develop our next generation of products, and then more recently, now that we've been on that journey since 2017, creating these new sort of strategic initiatives, Mobius, which is now Gresham, backed us at the beginning of last year to scale.
Okay,
so to continue to grow, but ultimately to scale what we'd already built.
So for over 10 years, you've had that kind of private equity investor involvement, which we see millions of success stories all the time, but there can be some changes that you need to make as a business. How has it changed kind of your involvement in the business and it going from just yours to all of a sudden almost being accountable, which as an owner manager, I imagine is quite a transition?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, there were 8. I think it was about 8 staff when we got the original round of funding.
Super early on.
And it introduced a discipline, as in board reporting and accountability, that actually was really important. We had to get stuff together. We had to get all the finances in place. We had to be challenged. Having Ash on board was a real help for me at the time, but it introduced something that was probably unusual for organisations with 8 staff.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And that set us in really good stead. And subsequent investors have always commented on how well prepared we are, and I think it's part of that journey. I think the importance of investment is the value of the investor is more than the size of the check, and I know that's a bit of a cliche. But really, when you're finding investors, it's about what else can they bring. And we've been fortunate enough to have supportive investors that we've learned from.
Brilliant.
So I don't really feel, I am accountable and I can't just go out and make willy-nilly decisions, but actually if the board doesn't think it's a good idea, then to some extent it's probably not a good idea anyway. And they've got the benefit of sitting on maybe 8 or 10 different boards, and they've been doing that for years. So it does there is a level of restriction, but I wouldn't say it's got in the way of
No.
what we've wanted to do.
And really what you've become accustomed to, having had that involvement for over 10 years now as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So running a business, like we say, it's a risk, it's not for the faint-hearted. Today, as the business currently is, what are those things that keep you awake at night, or rather none? Do you have perfectly great night's sleep? But what are those things that keep you awake at night?
I think the first one, and it's increasing, as the workforce becomes increasingly distributed, the one thing that bothers me more than anything is maintaining alignment when we're not all here.
Agree,
and making sure that you don't become a collection of individual teams, because what you'll find is this team will need to have meetings with this team, but they'll never see this one ever. Whereas if we were all in the office, then they'd be playing pool with each other, or they'd be having a brew together, or they'd be having lunch or whatever, and things cross-pollinate, and you remember that you are one team aligned to one direction of travel. And I think that's difficult. It's really hard now. There's certain members of the business and team members that I'm probably never going to see again.
Okay.
And now, it doesn't necessarily impact on productivity. It certainly works better for certain members of staff.
Yeah.
If I think about my development team, when we had 60 odd people in here, it's loud, it's noisy. Anything that requires deep concentration is difficult in that kind of environment. There's a buzz and it's really nice, but actually getting the job done can be quite difficult. So we do what we can to try and keep that alive. We have the summer fun day. I think we're probably about to have a Halloween day. We've had employee appreciation day. I'll do a monthly stand up once a month, obviously, where I'll run through what's happening in the business, and we encourage everybody to come in. And we run certain events throughout the club, but I don't want to mandate it. I don't want to say you have to be in the office. I think there's things that we can do. You've seen the office.
Yeah, it's a great space. Yeah.
There's loads of desks, but actually, if you're one of 3 people that's coming in on a particular day, seeing loads of empty desks can be quite. There's like tumbleweed.
Yeah, it's not the most motivating,
the
possibly.
Exactly. So maybe what we can do is turn that into more collaborative areas, and there's things that we can do to encourage people to come back in. So that's the number one thing. The second is competition. It's we've got a lot of well capitalised competition, new entrants that are joining the market.
Right. Somehow,
obviously, EdTech's become, particularly as a result of COVID, has become much more important. And then as a result of that, there's a renewed focus on early years EdTech, which is where we've had our success. So all of a sudden, you've got lots of money swirling around, and lots of people looking at what's going on and investing in competition. And I heard a great expression once, which is pioneers are the guys with arrows in their backs.
Okay.
And I think it's probably harder to stay number one than it is to get to number one. Because once you're at the top, then you're in everybody's sights.
Yeah.
Everybody's after you. It's not you chasing and working out how to take out, how are you going to take advantage of that inefficiency. It's everybody's looking at you.
Yeah.
So competition's a good thing because it keeps us on our toes, and we have to continue to innovate. But we've been the innovator, and we're continuing to be the innovator. But everybody else is starting to do.
But it's how do you try and keep that top spot now, basically?
Exactly. So they're the things.
Okay.
And we worked exceptionally hard to get the market position that we've got, but they're being hammered by our competition all the time. So it's how do we keep ahead of that?
Okay. Which I guess leads me on to my last couple of questions. So, what does the future look like for Connect Childcare? Being mindful of exactly what you just said, which is the marketplace is becoming a lot more competitive.
Yeah. So, we've always played in the enterprise space, or the larger nurseries within the UK. There's about 60,000, 65,000 childcare providers in the UK, and they care for about 2 million children, give or take. We've only ever focused on the top 10,000 of those. So we've done really well out of that. The 4,000 nurseries, roughly 4,000 nurseries that we've got are of that 10,000, so that's a good market share. But it's everybody within that segment. And in this particular industry is governed by has the same challenges, but just to a greater or lesser degree. So a childminder's still, has to be Ofsted regulated. They still have to adhere to the early years foundation stage. So I think one of the things is how do we satisfy the needs of the whole market, and that then in turn supports a number of different strategic initiatives that we've set up for the UK. The other is it's an increasingly global market. A lot of perhaps the barriers to international expansion, maybe when I started, you wouldn't have been able to do it. It's much easier now.
Right. Okay.
And that's part of the investment that we took from Deepbridge, was to build out that next generation of platform that allows us to provide the same level of service and solutions and answers to challenges for the whole of the UK market, but then look at international as well.
Okay.
So that's the big thing for us.
Yeah, so international, and then looking at the rest of the UK market and how you can...
Yeah, and the sort of the byproduct of all of that is that we own the rights to all the anonymised and aggregated data that sits on our platform. So that could be anything from how many inquiries are coming into a particular region to what was the impact of COVID on child development, or how much does a child develop with parental engagement. So there's loads of
insight almost. You've got
loads of insights that we've not quite worked out how to look at it from a monetary point of view, but we know that there's social value, because a lot of government policy is often based on outdated desk research. So when they're looking at new funding formulas, or how to encourage mums back to work, it's usually from really expensive desk research that's out of date before they even wrote the report. Whereas actually we've got all that in real time. So it's about how do we then get a more representative data set from the UK.
Yeah.
If we have value in the data, but at the moment it's very much focused on the large provider, so it's not representative.
Yeah.
If we go downstream, it becomes more representative, and then we can start to benchmark internationally.
Okay, so loads of new stuff then. Yeah.
Loads of new stuff. That's probably the thing, is just narrowing it down and focusing on the right one, which is
over the next few years.
Yeah.
And then 2 last things from me. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Is there anything that you would have done differently?
Probably.
Looking back.
Probably.
Anything that really stands out?
I think the key thing is perhaps not one individual instance. I think it's more a realisation that things always take longer than you think they are going to do. I was always going to be a millionaire at 40 and I'm nearly 50.
Yeah.
I think that things always take longer than you think, and I've always really firmly believed that I've wanted to develop the team from within.
Yeah.
And that's great in one respect, because you're giving everybody an opportunity, but sometimes they're just not going to be able to cut that step up. Yeah. And if you've got an ambitious plan, sometimes it's just worth going out and getting somebody that's done it before. And I think the other thing is that if you think that somebody isn't right in the role that they're in, I'm a firm believer in thin slicing, which is probably the gut feel that you've got about something is more than likely 80 or 90% right, and you can come to that conclusion really, really quickly. And I think you've got to listen to yourself, because if something's not right, chances are it's not right, and you need to make a decision quickly, or else it drifts. Yeah. And I think you've just got to be firm in your decisions.
Yeah. So make decisions quickly. Know when the right time to bring in a certain level of talent is, and don't think that you can become a millionaire in 3 to 5 years. Because let's be honest, that's exactly like when we set up. I remember I don't know who it is that even says it, but there's just this noise which is, well, in 3 to 5 years' time, you'll probably sell your business. Well, first of all, you might not want to, and secondly, it never really takes 3 to 5 years, does it? No, that's right.
Not in my experience.
No, I don't know in many people's experience, to be honest. Fabulous. Well, there's loads there that hopefully people will be able to learn from. So thank you very much for your time today.
No problem. Thanks for the opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you.